Good evening, I'm Andrew Grill. I'm a UTS alumni from 2001 and I've done a lot since 2001. I got married, had a child, moved to London, worked for 6 startups and survived 4 years at IBM. And I like doing things a bit differently, so just as we've set things up tonight, we're actually live streaming this event. While you don't need to watch the live stream because you're here, why not take a picture of this and send it to one of your friends who might want to watch this away from where they are, anywhere around the world. Practicalfuturist.live. You can also follow me on Twitter and you can also use the UTS alumni hashtag. And why am I doing this? I want to try things that are a little bit different. And so what I'm going to talk to you about tonight is how you can actually rise above the noise and be very different. What Attila has said is it's very important for you to start to reskill. What I say to all audiences when I talk around the world is you all look like wonderful, fabulous people, but you also look very much the same. So what I want to be able to have you do is rise above the noise and be very, very different and stand out from the crowd. I speak around the world, and so I've just come back from Amsterdam and Barcelona where I've spoken to Nike, I've spoken to Maersk, the transport company, and a large PR company. And the themes that came out of it are quite similar. And the slide I'm about to present to you is one that I show a lot. It's quite scary because since 2000, 52% of the Fortune 500 have been destroyed because of digital disruption. And when I talk to firms, I don't want any of them to be in that number. And you might think of companies like Kodak, Blockbuster, and a bunch of others that are going the wrong way. And if you remember nothing from my talk tonight, I want you to disrupt yourselves before you're disrupted. And by that I mean, look at what's going on in the industry, look at how you can actually rise above the noise and become very different. But normally if you were to look way into the future, you would employ a futurist. And my favourite futurist is Arthur C. Clarke. Everyone know who Arthur C. Clarke is? It's 50 years this year since Space Odyssey 2001 was released. And it was an amazing movie. And actually back in 1974, an Australian journalist from the ABC got hold of Arthur and he asked him, what would life be like in the year 2001? And here's what he had to say.
Well, with that movie 2001, you're projecting us into the 21st century. I brought along my son Jonathan, who in the year 2001 will be the same age as I am now. Maybe he will be better adjusted to this kind of world that you're trying to portray.
The big difference when he grows up, in fact, if we wanted to wait for the year 2001, is that he will have in his own house, not a computer as big as this, but at least a console through which he can talk to his friendly local computer and get all the information he needs for his everyday life, like his bank statements, his theatre reservations, all the information you need in the course of living in a complex modern society. This will be in a compact form in his own house. He'll have a television screen like these here and a keyboard, and he'll talk to the computer and get information from it, and he'll take it as much for granted as we take the telephone.
I wonder though, what sort of a life would it be like in social terms? I mean, if our whole life is built around the computer, do we become a computer-dependent society and computer-independent individuals? In
some ways, but they'll also enrich our society because it'll make it possible for us to live really anywhere we like. Any businessman and executive could live almost anywhere on Earth and still do his business through a device like this. And this is a wonderful thing. It means we want to be stuck in cities, we better live out in the country or wherever we please and still carry on complete interaction with human beings as well as with other computers.
So I think Arthur got it pretty right, and every time I watch that I'm amazed at how he was able to see what was going to happen in the future, that we would have a computer in our own home, that we would be able to work away from our desk. He even addressed the societal impacts. The one thing he didn't predict was the iPhone 10, but maybe if he had a bit longer. But the problem was Arthur was looking 30 years in the future. Now, when I talk to audiences like you and other clients and other corporates, they don't have 30 years, they don't have 30 months, they don't even have 30 weeks. They want to know now, what do they need to do to stop being disrupted and have their business propel forward? So what you need is a practical futurist, and that's why I call myself a practical futurist. And tonight, I want you to take away some practical tips that you can use tomorrow and next week in your own business. But it's nice that I'm an alumnus, so that's why I'm allowed to speak to UTS alumnus. But also, I think you should know a little bit about my digital credentials to see why I'm up here and why I can impart some wisdom. Does anyone know what this is? Few people, few nods. It's my first computer in 1980, the Sinclair ZX80, built here in the UK. It had 4K of RAM, 1K of ROM and a switchy keyboard, and that's where I learnt how to program. And my daughter Madeline, she's now 11, and we went to the Science Museum recently here in London, and we walked past a display case, and there's the Apple II that I used at school, and then she pointed to the Sinclair ZX and said, "Daddy, isn't that the computer you keep talking about?" "Yeah." "Well, it's behind a glass case in a museum. You must be really old." "Yes, Madeline, I'm really old, 50 this year." So I've been doing this stuff for a while, and that's why I think I'm qualified to talk about things that are happening from the future and also from before. Anyone remember this noise? Yeah, not so long ago, we dialed up to the internet. If we just listen for a moment, is it going to connect? Is it going to connect? And yes, finally it connected. Now, anyone here born after 1983? Yeah. So I was online in 1983. I've been online longer than you've been alive. And I used to dial up to these things called bulletin boards. Now you're an Australian audience, so I'm from Adelaide, and the Angle Park Computing Centre had 6 phones lined into a BBS bulletin board called Nexus. This isn't Nexus, but it's something like this. And I would dial up and I would leave messages, we now call them email, and I would then ring up every 6 hours to see if my friends had left me messages. Now I knew in 1983 that I was hooked on this online thing when my father had to get an extra phone line because no one could get through. I was always dialed up to this online thing. But the problem with everything at the moment is what's happening in terms of media fragmentation and stopping us from seeing ads. Who here uses an ad blocker? Few people. In the US, 85% of millennials block ads. And when I present this to corporates, they go, "This is a problem because it means people aren't going to see our content. So what are we going to do?" And I was researching ad blockers. I was on Wired and up popped an ad blocker, which I thought was kind of ironic. And I've actually started collecting them because some of them are quite funny. "Please disable ad block. You're blocking my ads. Please stop. I understand or I don't care." The best one I've seen was actually an ad blocker ad for Black Mirror. And it said, "Hello, ad blocker user. You cannot see the ad, but the ad can see you." And I thought that was very, very funny. But what's happening is it's becoming harder and harder to cut through the noise and get your message out there. And a UK firm called Raconteur Media have recently surveyed 500 CEOs. And they're asked, how do you consume content and what content do you like? And some of the results were quite startling. So 50% read and like the content if the author is recognised expert. So it's got to be someone that actually knows what they're talking about. 47% say it's shared if it's recommended by a respected or influential figure in the industry. So it just can't be an influencer with lots of followers. It's got to be someone who is respected in the industry. If the content is based on original primary research or empirical evidence, they'll read it. If it's shared with me or recommended by someone I know or trust, or if the content is published by someone that I respect. So you can't just put an ad out there, you can't just go and find some influencer and pay them some cash. You've got to have something credible to say. And I spend a lot of time talking to clients about how they can actually become thought leaders and be very eminent and then provide some content that the C-suite will actually want to read. But if we're to talk about disruption, I want to talk about why I think disruption happens. I think disruption happens for 3 main forces. First of all, there are high profits. Think about the taxi industry, the media industry, the hotel industry. There are very high profits to be made, and disruptors circle around going, "I'd like some of that." And so technology is now able to grab some of those high profits. The fact I can order a pizza or a parcel to this hotel right now on my phone and pay for it is commonplace. And so now that I can do that, it makes it a lot easier for these disruptors to get the high profits. And finally, consumers demand it. I don't know about you, but I haven't booked an airline seat in years where I couldn't choose my seat. And more recently, when I've stayed at Hilton hotels, I've been able to book in the night before to where I want to stay, which room I want, and then I go along with my Hilton app and I unlock the door and walk straight in. Am I going to stay anywhere else? No, because there's no friction. And when I see the line of 300 people trying to check in at 11 o'clock at night in San Francisco Hilton, I go, suckers, I'm going straight to my room, and I've saved several hours. But disruption is happening to even Australian companies. So Mr. Murdoch's 21st Century Fox, he has decided he's reached the peak. He's selling out to Disney or Comcast. He's realised he can't get any more out of his asset and he's going to give someone else a go. Same with Frank Lowe with Westfield. He's selling out because he's realised he's got to the peak, and Amazon and other companies are making it harder and harder for bricks and mortar companies to survive. But disruption is happening everywhere. Who here uses WhatsApp? Most people? Guess how many WhatsApps are sent every day on the WhatsApp network? Billions. How many billions? Try 64 billion every day from one app on one network. If we compare that with SMS everywhere in the world, 20 billion. That's massive disruption. Why? Because the friction is removed and you don't have to worry about paying for it, and there's group chat and all those sorts of things, and it just makes it ridiculously easy. But if you're thinking, well, this disruption isn't going to happen, I'll just hold off for a while, PwC says that it can actually be worse to do nothing. Because some of these industries have a few more years left before they're totally decimated. So by sitting there and doing nothing, you can actually be very, very silly. Because I think there are three types of people in every organisation. There are prayers, stayers and players. The prayers are hoping that this is going to go away before they retire. The stayers are saying, I'm just going to stay the course, I'm not sure what to do. And the players are actively leaning forward and saying, I want to know what to do, I want to reskill, I want to find out how I can learn some of these new digital skills. But all industries are being disrupted. Deloitte in Australia did a great report. They called it Short Fuse, Big Bang. And the stats are just as relevant here in Europe. They basically looked at a bunch of industries. Along the x-axis is the timing, how long the fuse is before it blows up, and the vertical axis is the impact, the bang. If we look at the top left, short fuse, big bang. Anyone in those industries here in the room? Wow. There's a problem with this report though. It's from 2012. It's already happened. These industries have already been disrupted. In fact, because that chart is now 6 years old, pretty much every industry on that chart is being disrupted. So let's look at some of the disruptors and pick them apart to see how they've become so successful and what can we learn from them. And I want you to think about a particular disruptor. I'm going to sort of tease you about who it is. If I give you this number, 63,990, any idea who I'm talking about? No? Well, let's give you another clue. 2 pizzas. No, that will become evident in a moment. This is their stock price. Any hints there? Amazon, great guess. Since 20 years ago, Amazon have grown their share price by 66,990%. Wow, they're doing something right. Now, I dug deeper to sort of work out why Amazon's so successful. I came across Warren Buffett. And Warren was asked in an interview, why don't you invest in Amazon? And his one-word answer was, stupidity. Probed further, he gave a brilliant example of why Amazon has been so successful. Let's have a listen.
With Amazon, he said, we needed the internet. Somebody else spent billions of dollars developing it, but it wouldn't have worked without the internet. He said we needed transportation. Somebody else had already built railroads and UPS and all of that sort of thing. And he said we needed payment systems. That would take billions of dollars to build, but that had already been done by Visa and all along the line. So he took 3 huge requirements where the other guys had spent the money, and then he combined them in a way that he didn't have to spend the money. I was impressed with Jeff early. I never thought he could pull off what he did. And what's really, I mean, I thought he could pull off something, but on the scale that has happened, I mean, it's changed your behavior, you know, it's changed everybody in the office's behavior. And the remarkable thing about Jeff, and everything else, is he's done it in 2 industries almost simultaneously that really don't have that much connection. I've never seen any person develop 2 really important industries at the same time. Here you take cloud services. He thought he would have 2 years of runway. He got 7 years. You do not want to give Jeff Bezos a 7-year head start.
Before the competitors jumped in on cloud services.
Race. So the same time he's shaking up the whole retail world, he's also shaking up the IT world simultaneously, and you know, I take my hat off to him.
So it's really interesting, the 3 things he needed, he didn't have to pay for. Payment system, transportation, and communication. And so what about your industries? What are the things you don't need to pay for and you can actually have on top? The other brilliant thing was he realised he had all spare server capacity, all these servers he was running for Amazon.com. He said, what about if I rent these servers out to people that need it? So the 7 years of runway was the 7 years ahead of Google and Microsoft in running Amazon Web Services, another very successful business. The 2 pizzas, Jeff Bezos has the 2 pizza rule. If you can't feed your team with 2 pizzas, it's too big because you get groupthink. Now when I say this around the world, there is an uncomfortable silence. They're going, could we feed our team with 2 pizzas? They might go hungry. But think about it. If you've got 15 or 20 people in a room, often you get the hippo syndrome, the highest person's paid opinion. Highest paid person's opinion. And it doesn't always work. So next time when the team's hungry, see if you can feed them with 2 pizzas or look at reorganisation. So the new default settings, the 3 disruptors I'm going to talk about are ones that we know about, but again, I want to pick them apart. We don't talk about getting a taxi anymore, we talk about getting an Uber. Now, Uber is probably the most overused example of disruptor, and I think even today they probably aren't the best example. They've had a whole lot of issues, and they broke a lot of rules. And they waited for regulators to catch up, and they've had to reorient their model. Now, initially, Uber started life as a limo sharing app. Travis and his friends were at Le Web in Paris several years ago, and they thought, wouldn't it be great if we could order a limo to where we are right now? And And they worked out that after a while, not everyone wanted to hire a limo. And they had to broaden it and then pivot. So that's why they are doing what they're doing. Airbnb, who knows how they got their name? What's the air stand for Airbnb? Anyone know? Air mattress. They started life with houses in the US that had a spare room with an air mattress. Again, addressable market for US homes with an air mattress and a spare room is quite low, and they had to pivot. And what we're seeing now here in London is the short-term rental market is being massively disrupted. If you're a landlord, would you want to rent out for 15 or 20 nights a month to different people at a high premium, or one person for 30 nights a month? Probably it's the former. And so now there's regulation coming in to stop that. And finally, Netflix. Funny thing happened the other day. Cold Feet came back onto ITV, the second series. And I sat and watched it one Friday night, and about 15 minutes into it, the program stopped, and there were these messages. I thought, this is weird. Oh, they're ads. I forgot what they look like, because I'm on Netflix, I don't see ads. Netflix started life, though, as a DVD mailer service. You would look online what you wanted, and they'd send you a DVD. Now, those millennials in the room, there used to be this company called Blockbuster, and you actually had a VHS tape, and if you took it back late, you got fined, and you got fined $3 if you didn't rewind it. And I remember going, oh no, I forgot to rewind it. And I get these, not just late fees, I get these rewind fees. Now, millennials will say, what's there to rewind? But what Netflix are doing is they've pivoted. They've said, we can now stream programs onto the internet. The technology is there, as we saw with the three different disruptive forces. And they're now dropping $8 billion a year to make their own content. BBC, ITV, Channel 5, they're now very worried and looking at getting together to say, what do we do to fight off Amazon? And it's going to be very interesting. Who's heard of Trove, T-R-O-V? Trove's a really interesting disruptor. They are disrupting insurance. Here's how.
I'm leaving my house now. And as I step outside, all of these things with me are fully insured against loss or damage, instantly. That trick I just showed you, that's Trove. Trove is smart insurance. Unlike blanket policies that cover everything at once, Trove helps me protect just the things I care about. All I have to do is swipe to protect. So if anything happens, just about anything you can imagine, I know my camera's covered. Trove makes it easy to file a claim through the app. I just answer these questions, and Trove handles the rest. And every time I leave my house, things like my laptop and phone are protected. Trove puts me in control of the things I care about, and that's really smart.
So who thinks they would use a service like that? Yeah, you can do it right now in the UK. It's live in Australia, UK, and soon to be the US. And what's interesting about this service is it appeals to people that only want to insure things for a day or a week rather than a whole year. And the interesting thing was, last year I presented this concept at a big insurance conference here in London. And straight after my talk, all the CEOs from the companies were up and they were discussing this, and they said, oh, we're not worried about Trove. What was interesting though, off stage, standing next to me, were all of their direct reports going, we're really worried about Trove, because they removed the friction. They removed the friction from buying and claiming insurance. And back to those three forces, there are huge profits to be made in insurance. Technology can fix it, and this just makes it easier. And eventually, that will be the way you buy insurance. In fact, I'm going to show you in a minute the way advertising will change as well. Now, last week, Google launched a game changer. This blew my mind when I saw it. Now, I'm going to show you a video. It's about 60 seconds long. All you need to know, on the left-hand side of the screen is AI. On the right-hand side of the screen is a human.
So how can I help you? Hi, I'm calling to book a women's haircut for a client. I'm looking for something on May 3rd. Sure, give me 1 second. Sure, what time are you looking for around? At 12 p.m. We do not have a 12 p.m. available. The closest we have to that is a 1:15. Do you have anything between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m.? Depending on what service she would like. What service is she looking for? Just a woman's haircut for now. Okay, we have a 10 o'clock. 10 a.m. is fine. Okay, what's her first name? The first name is Lisa. Okay, perfect. So I will see Lisa at 10 o'clock on May 3rd. Okay, great. Thanks. Great. Have a great day. Bye.
Wow. Now to set that up, the way that was triggered was someone on their Google app basically said, book me a haircut. Now think about it, those of you who are lucky enough to have a personal or executive assistant, he or she would do that for you if you asked them nicely, and they would know when you're available, when you like to have your haircut, who you have your haircut with. But now it's going to be done by AI. And so you can now offload that to a computer that then makes the phone call and does the booking. See, I think we're going to have to think about writing copy for robots very soon. Because what's happened recently with the Facebook Cambridge Analytica expose is that consumers are now going, Facebook did what with my data? And actually in Australia, it's very interesting. If you're reading the Australian papers last week, Oracle basically gave Google a bloody nose because Oracle have done some digging, and if you have an Android phone, every month about 1 gigabyte of data goes back to Google. Not stuff you've asked to go back, barometric pressure to tell you which level in the shopping centre you're in and which shop did you look at. And Google have said it's perfectly fine because you consent to use Google services. So I think Google is the next one where people are going to go, you're sending what back? Google even knows if you stepped out of the car. Google knows if you're on foot, in a car, in a train, so they can use that. Now, they may say that's fair, but I think consumers, yourselves included, are going to say, hang on, there's some value in that, and I want a fair value exchange. So what I think will happen, within 5 to 7 years, we will have our own digital agents. And our digital agents will go and do digital deals with companies digitally, just like you saw there. So for example, my insurance, health insurance is due in November. My digital assistant knows that. It knows what the tolerances are and what I would accept or reject. So I basically say, I don't actually tell it to do the insurance, it knows that it's due. And it goes out and does its digital deals and finds out that one deal is 40% off if I send my Fitbit health information. And it knows that that's within my tolerances. It sends it off in a one-time hash, which means they can't use it again, and it's all done for me. I think we're about 5 years away from that, and Google last week unveiling what they called Google Duplex facilitates that. So I would start playing with that to see how it might help your business. I think also 2018, especially in Europe, is the year of regulated disruption for 2 reasons. First of all, a thing called open banking, or the Payment Services Directive number 2, to give it its sexy name. It's already live, but unfortunately 5 of the 9 banks weren't ready when it launched in February. It basically means you're able to allow your bank to share information with permission with other apps and other companies. So for example, HSBC have got an app called HSBC Beta. I'm an HSBC customer, so I see my HSBC stuff. It can also pull in my Barclays, my American Express, and I can start doing some really smart stuff with it. And HSBC may not be the best company to manipulate my data, so fintechs, financial tech startups, can then use my data with my permission and start telling me about how I should be saving. This opens up a whole new world. Now, interestingly, when I asked a couple of the banks, would you have done this if you weren't mandated by the government? They said, of course not, it's expensive. But it's forced them to provide machine-readable content so other companies can benefit. Watch it happen now in utilities, in telco, in transportation. It is the tip of the iceberg. The second thing for regulated disruption happens next Friday, a week from today. Who here does not know about GDPR? Every audience have had 1 or 2. Okay, it's happening next Friday and it's a big deal. If you breach the laws, you'll find either 20 million euros or 4% of global revenues, whichever is largest. The ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office, who oversee this law in the UK, are waiting to pounce to have a Facebook or someone make a mistake and go after them. But I see this as a huge opportunity. The Data Protection Act, which is being replaced by GDPR, is 20 years old. It's not fit for purpose. And marketers have not kept up to speed, marketers have not kept up to speed with the law. And the reason the last 2 weeks you've had all these emails saying, we care about your privacy. We're overhauling our policies to make it more transparent. Brackets, if we don't, we're going to get fined. They've had 2 years. This law has been in place for 2 years. They've had 2 years to say, we're going to be an honest, reputable firm. It's enforceable from Friday. That's why you're getting all these flurry of emails. But 2 years ago, this company called How Much looked at what is my data worth to all these different websites based on advertising. Now just scan your eye across that and look at the sites that you use, and you add up the numbers and you're probably going to say, where's my check? So I think that open banking, opening up your data, GDPR making sensible decisions about your data, consumers like yourselves in the room are going to say, I want my fair share. I think I'm worth £500 to £1,000 a year to Google. Where's my money? And Google are going to have to wind this back. So I think you're going to see a fundamental change, and I want you to be on top of it. But to get this new digital regime, to get digital, you need to be digital. And by this, and what Attila said, you need to reinvest your own time and energy in reskilling. I'm not suggesting going and doing a whole computer course or a whole new MBA, but be inquisitive. I heard an executive the other day who works for a very large bank. He is putting himself on a cybersecurity course. He's doing something every 6 or 7 months to upskill himself. And what I'm going to show you next, get your phones out. I'm going to call this the scary slide. These words, this terminology will impact your business and your industry within the next 18 months. And you might say, I don't know what some of those mean. And there's a reason for that. All the phones are going up. This is my most photographed slide. I should put some sort of donate here thing on there. There we go. It's okay if you don't know what they all mean. Tonight, tomorrow, go to Wikipedia, work out what it means, and then work out what it means for your company and whether you need to worry about it. So it's not on there, but one of them, the phrase is IoT, Internet of Things. And a few years ago, I thought, what is this IoT thing? So I did a Google search, and I worked out that for £50, I could buy a kit. It was a red blob, a bit of tech, and as you move it around, and you hook it up with Bluetooth to your phone, it shows what angle it's at and what the barometric pressure is. Only then did I go, I get this now. And only when you physically, emotionally get involved and understand what this tech is, can you then go, I get it. And I encourage the C-suite, I encourage people at all levels to understand what this means. But it means you're going to have to do something different in your business. You're going to have small innovation teams. You're going to have to stop doing something and start actually running things in an innovation way. And what Barclays have done is amazing. Barclays have set up a thing called Barclays Rise. There's one in Shoreditch, there's one in New York. They basically have bought a whole building and they allow fintech startups to essentially rent a desk there like a WeWork. What it means is that Barclays gets the first look at these really smart companies. They may not invest in them, but they see them, they hang around them. And I encourage all the people I speak to, spend a day or a week at a WeWork. Why? Because one, it's going to feel very uncomfortable. Secondly, you're going to overhear discussions that you're going to go, that's interesting. And I turned this around a few weeks ago. I was fortunate to be able to speak to the Welsh Government, a bunch of regulators. And I said, here's what you should do. Go to a WeWork, go to a co-working space. And 3 of them afterwards came up and said, I'm going to do that because I want to understand these companies that want to disrupt us and we've got to regulate them. How can we work together? So that might help. Get agile. It's not all about post-it notes. Agile methodology is about doing things very quickly. And yesterday I was in Barcelona speaking to Nike at a company called 21 Buttons. They're a startup. And as we were talking, there were about 20 people from Nike there. Across the way, 5 or 10 of them stood up and started in a huddle. And that's what's called a scrum meeting. And they basically spent 15 minutes updating each other on the progress of the project. And they sat down again and gone on with their work. And the Nike guys went, what was that? That's a scrum meeting. Rather than spending 3 hours on a meeting, they all stand up and report in 15 minutes. Queen Victoria famously had her household meetings every week standing up. And they went very quickly. Quick win. Who here uses a collaboration tool like Slack or Chatter or Yammer at work? Yeah, and you probably all use it pretty badly. And no one quite knows why you're using it. When I was at IBM, this became the lifeline. So I was one of 400,000 people globally. And so I would say, I'm going to see Nike next week. Who's met with them? What can you tell me about them? And I would have people come out of the woodwork. Now, no matter what size your company is, email is dead. I mean, it's so boring to have all this store and forward stuff. The Slack or the Chatter channels can be very, very productive, but you've got to use them in the right way. And you've got to change your culture to something called working out loud. There's a great book by John Stepper that talks about this whole concept. You basically tell the rest of the company on these collaboration platforms what you're doing. And you might go, that's crazy, because in the old way, information was power. But in the new way, your value to an organisation is not what you know, it's what you share. And by sharing information, you can then have a better fulfilled job, get things done faster, and delight customers in a better way. But you can't forget the customer. A couple of years ago, I was in New York and I listened to Kevin Plank, who's the CEO of Under Armour. He has a whiteboard in his office and he has, in permanent ink, something that says, don't forget to sell shirts and shoes. Doesn't matter how many likes or followers or website hits that you have, you've got to sell more shirts and shoes or whatever you actually produce, and always have that in front of your mind. Another thing that you should be thinking about is broadening your advisory board or your advisory board. I see board after board full of pale, aged, middle-aged, white, grey-haired men. Pale and stale, that's what I was looking for. And it really annoys me because you need people that see the world through a digital lens. So you need digital diversity. And you need not 1 but 2. So next time you're looking at your board construction, challenge whoever leads the board to say, why don't we have some new talent on this board two people that see things through a digital lens. They can be on the board anyway because they understand governance and structure and everything else, but they see the world through a digital lens. I think that will help. And finally, to our millennials in the room, there is a place for you in the world as well. I have this love-hate relationship, though, with the thought of a demographic being named by one particular name. In fact, yesterday at Nike, we learned that there are actually two types of millennials, the old and the young, and that just blew my head. But I saw this LinkedIn post recently. This guy said, I'm consistently amazed at how many applications I receive from university graduates looking at their first ever paid work. I don't know about you, but when I went to university and studied my engineering degree all those years ago, I'd had 4 or 5 jobs by then. And Simon Sinek, who reports on millennials, says, no disrespect, that millennials have a problem, that their parents tell them that they can do anything and that they're wonderful. And they get to work and they realise that they can't do everything and they're not wonderful. So that's a problem. But every organisation has 2 tribes. You have the going digital, most of us represented here today. You know how to influence the highest levels, you know how to get things done, but your digital skills are developing. Then there are the born digital, born with the iPhone in the mouth. They live and breathe this. They don't know how to not do something. The 2 tribes need each other. And today when I was talking to a PR firm called Keynote, I encouraged them to put some of the young leaders on their management team. What will happen? They will see they have a diversity of thought and they think about things in a different way. And they were going, yeah, we should do that. I took millennials along to customer meetings at IBM. 2 reasons. One, they think differently. Secondly, the client went, wow, I'm seeing a different face of IBM. That's really, really rewarding. So let me leave you 3 tips. As I'm the practical futurist, I want you to be able to do at least 3 things tomorrow or next week. First of all, create unique and original content. And it's so easy to do. I'll explain how. I'm on LinkedIn and I've challenged myself every day to do a new LinkedIn post, and I've started doing some stuff with video. You might say, well, how do I do that? Well, this is my studio. It's a bit messy, don't look at that. Camera with a green screen. I basically yell at the camera for 5 or 6 minutes in front of a green screen. I then go to nice places around London and film. I was at the Shard and also the Gherkin a few weeks ago, and I snuck my camera in and took 10 minutes of video. And I then can produce something that looks kind of cool. And back to that C-suite study, people want to have content that's actually reputable. One of the reasons I'm live streaming today is to produce some content so people can see what I do. So the live stream is an example there. The other tip is be digital. Back to the scary slide. You know, be honest and actually look at the things you do and don't know and actually be curious and work out what these things mean and what they mean for your business. And the third and final thing is disrupt, or you will be disrupted. Thank you very much. Yeah, only disruptive questions. They have to be disruptive.
They're very disruptive.
Good.
Scott Westway, I really like the presentation. The question I've got for you, we'll go back to the start where you showed the video of the gentleman with his key talking to the futurist. I'd like to put you in the hot seat of that futurist now and ask you the question.
Yeah.
If you were going to talk about where you saw the world in 30 years' time, what would you say?
So I deliberately don't look that far ahead, but I'm going to humour you because I think it's a fair question. So if I'm right and in 5 and 7 years we don't see ads anymore, ads won't disappear. They'll morph into something else. They'll have to be more interesting. If I stood here and someone held a piece of white paper in front of me for 30 seconds, you go, that's a bit annoying. That's an ad. And so I think that, like what I said, that the consumers will value their data, and I don't think we'll be marching on the streets, but it'll be, hang on, I'm not going to accept OK, and Google, your revenue's dropping, and Facebook, your revenue's dropping, because you're not going to have the data at no cost. So that will fundamentally change. AI will have advanced in leaps and bounds. What we saw with Google is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what can happen. One thing I didn't mention that I think is also another technology is blockchain. Now, blockchain we talk about with Bitcoin, which is cryptocurrency, and unfortunately, because cryptocurrency is about money, it gets in the paper. And Bitcoin on the blockchain was developed because you can't trust who you're dealing with. We'll see the rise of private blockchains, so that a distributed ledger, which is what blockchain is, so a shipping company will have their own private ledger for all the logistics that they do. That will fundamentally change, and that will actually help power personal data information. So I think in under 10 years, so I haven't got to 30 yet, Facebook won't have any information on me. Facebook want to find out about me. They will interrogate my personal cloud, and if given permission and given a value exchange, I will provide Facebook with the information they want. At the moment, it's basically click here to accept, we'll hoover up all your data, and we'll see who we can sell it to. And if we get into trouble, we won't go and talk to Congress. So what will then be in 30 years' time? So we would have solved the cloud computing. That will just become ubiquitous. Quantum computing is the next step. And what's scary about quantum computing, the whole thing around encryption, the reason that when you do a banking transaction, you have that little padlock there, there's encryption. But quantum computers will hack that in seconds. So we'll have to look at new ways of securing our data. And I think individuals will highly value their own data. So we won't see ads. We'll have a lot of functions performed by AI and AI-like things, and we'll really value what we're doing with our own data. We won't be as laissez-faire. We'll look back on the 1990s and the 2018 time. Why were we giving all this data away? It could be worth tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, and we were giving it away. I hope that answers your question. I got to about 21 years. I think I'm getting to 30. It's too scary out there. It's too scary. I'm going to do gender diversity. So, madam there, yes. Yes, you. Do we give her a microphone? As long as you give it back. And stop playing with the buttons, Selena. Make sure it's red. Red means on.
Hi. My name is Sylvie. I am actually an alumni student from the architecture department of UTS, and I also have a master's degree in science and technology here in UK. I just recently left the corporate world to start my own practice, so I found very interesting that the UTS is start to look at that, small businesses and funds, and I'm quite interested also to know more about your point of view for the industry today, not just the digital side, but where we disrupt the big organization, which are, 20 years or more existing, that we see a big beast of 100,000 people, and now the small company actually beat them up.
Yeah, the small companies are winning, so that Uber and Netflix and Airbnb all started 10 years ago as small, tiny companies, and they've been able to disrupt. I think, again, back to your point, fundamental change we'll see in the next 20 or 30 years. Companies have become too big. I didn't explain my background. I did an engineering degree. I worked for British Aerospace. I worked for Telstra and Optus, then 12 years of startups, then IBM. So I've got a perspective from both sides. And I love being in startups because we just broke rules all the time, but it's hard to get things done. In a large organisation like a Telstra and IBM, the challenge is so much different. And I get really frustrated because I think large organisations can't get out of their own way. They are rigidly structured. Their boards are filled with pale and stale leadership, and they can't get out of their own way. And they go, well, we can't have young people on the board because they don't understand the way business works. So I think we will see the rise of the entrepreneur. I think the gig economy will also, one thing I didn't mention in the 30-year plan, the gig economy, we think about Deliveroo and bike drivers, but the gig economy stretches to interim consultants. So I'm now out on my own, and so I rent my time out to various people. And I might work for 4 or 5 different companies every week. The notion of being at one company for 5 days a week, I think in the next 30 years and less, will be gone. And so you'll be able to be an entrepreneur, which means companies will have to say, we can't get talent that's available 5 days a week. We've got to augment that with short-term workers, and how do we then have the future of work? And the future of work will very much be itinerant and the gig economy. So I think we need to rely on governments to invest more to allow these companies to grow. I go to these events where there are 200 people in the room, they're all startups, and I know that 99% of them will fail, because getting an idea up is really hard. I mean, the 6 startups that I worked for, I was lucky they were well funded. They weren't from no dollars, they were well funded, and they were successful. But I think the future will be small companies able to disrupt and move a lot faster, and we'll see more and more of it. And technology is helping that. 10 years ago, Uber and others couldn't do what they're doing because the computing capacity wasn't there. So I think, over there. Yes, I'm going to pass the microphone down the talking stick.
UTS graduate, PhD in project management, 2011. I'm wondering about your thoughts on disruptive technology as it relates to, I think, true game-changing things like, public priorities, things like climate change, poverty eradication, immigration, the spread of immigrants across Europe. All due respect to the Jeff Bezos of the world, there are game changers and then there are game changers. What do you think disruptive technology will do to aid in those public priorities?
Wow. Not sure if I can answer that in the time I've got. I think we're going to see technology come to the fore and make it a lot easier for all types of organisations to get ahead. I think governments will realise that it becomes sexy to invest in those sorts of good. I would like to see the Amazons and the Googles of this world and Apples that had so much money to burn, they can't invest fast enough. Why don't they go, hey, okay, let's just drop 10 billion on what Bill Gates and others are doing. It shouldn't be up to the 5 or 10 billionaires around the world to divvy up the cash. I think we're going to see, again, not marching on the streets, but I think we're going to see citizens go, hang on, you can't spend that money fast enough. You need to reinvest it to have a sustainable planet. So I welcome those sort of initiatives, and I think technology is going to make it easier, but I think we need some of the big companies that are so big to start being a little bit more philanthropic. Not that they're not already, but I think there's more to go. I'm going to pick someone on this side of the room. Yes?
Shall I just shout?
Just shout. The microphone come across, but by the time you get across, just shout, yeah.
You talked about disruptive technologies affecting the media industry in 2012. Hi, Samia Robbins. I'm a UTS International Business Alumni, and I'm not going to say the year. You talked about that disruptive technologies affected the media industry in 2012. Has that disruption stopped? And, well, if it hasn't, what are the sort of lessons learned from that industry? What are we sort of implementing now to protect ourselves, perhaps, for the future?
When you say media, can you just broaden what you define as media?
Potentially sort of the more advertising industry, and you've probably touched on that.
So I think we're seeing this year a pinnacle. So WPP share price before Martin Sorrell left was already down 60%. You've got the big companies saying we don't need agencies anymore, we're going to go direct to publishers. And so they're being disintermediated. And they got fat, dumb and happy, and they know that. And in fact, ironically, Sir Martin Sorrell is now saying, now that he stepped away, he can see how inefficient it was. But make no mistake, and I'm happy to say this live, WPP was set up to allow companies to fight with each other. That this disruptive chaos actually was why they were so successful. But now it doesn't work because you've got all these different companies fighting together. And now what you're seeing, Ogilvy and Mather are now getting rid of all their sub-brands and now becoming one brand. So I think the media industry is realising people are blocking ads. We're going to have robots reading ads, not humans. We've got a bit of a problem. But it's been the same way for 50 years. Interruption advertising, my experience in watching Cold Feet and then having this message versus Netflix and never seeing an ad, I think that's the norm now. And so I think, yes, people like Mark Ritson will say, traditional TV, it still sells. It sells because it's very inefficient. If you throw enough money at it, it will sell. But I think where we've seen advertising go wrong, if you've ever been to the John Lewis website and bought something and then the next 6 weeks it reminds you about the thing you've already bought, that's called dumb targeting, not retargeting. I see lots of that and I just wonder why advertisers get away with that. So I think we're seeing a lot of disruption. We have time for a few more questions. I'm going to be here all night. One more question. All right. Sir, you can have your question, sir.
Michael Dodd, Arts and Humanities. For the purposes of this question, I'm not a millennial.
I am a millennial trapped in a 49-year-old body.
Right. Yeah, that guy on the screen looks much younger, though.
That was thank you, that was last year. Thanks very much.
So what's the difference between an old millennial and a young millennial? And what are the babies born today going to be like in the future? So
I'll ask the second bit. So my daughter Madeline, who's 11, is Gen Z. He's Gen Z. So I'm an X, millennials are Ys, and they're Zs. I think the Zs will go back to reading books. I think the Zs will go out and get their fingers and hands dirty and actually play like normal people rather than doing a screen all the time.
So why young people like Polaroid cameras?
Stuff like that's coming back because the notion of developing a photograph and doing like that and appearing in, that's magic rather than seeing it on a screen. So I think what we'll actually see, there'll be a correction that, no disrespect to the millennials here, you've had it pretty good. I think Gen Z or Z will actually correct back and go, you know what, I want to go out and dig a hole in the ground. And I don't need to do it online, I want to go out with my mates. And we're seeing some of that. Now the old and the young millennial bit, the older millennials are now starting families and are in their second or third career. The younger millennials are just out of university and don't have that experience. So because they're 10 or 15, well, it's a generation, so 25 years, you've got to spread. And I think it's wrong to say all millennials are the same. But I think, for example, as a Gen X, I've grown up never seeing a world war. I've grown up never knowing polio as being an infliction. My parents saw that. So I think we do have different life experiences, but we all can learn from each other. My last slide was about these two tribes. So that's being very short and concise. You've got born digital, going digital. The two need to work together no matter what class they are. Thank you for your time. I'm going to be here afterwards. You can find me online. You can watch the replay. Thank you very much for your attention.